Hello and welcome back to Faces of Truth, where we attempt to help Americans think for themselves again, and in the process, spread truth through the minds of humanity. My name's Alexander McCauley. I'll be your host for the next few minutes. This episode I'm planning on talking about what the transition period between a colder and warmer climate would actually look like and what you would actually experience. Our friends in the climate alarmist community would have us believe that oceans would rise and decimate human civilization on the seacoast. Well, according to historical sources, we've got several communities who actually are below sea level at the moment. At least 3 that I can count, or that I can recall. These would be Denmark, Venice, and New Orleans. Denmark and New Orleans built seawalls to keep the sea out. Venice built a city out from the water with foundations underneath the water. In these days, we've got access to technologies that would allow us to build buildings with the first few floors totally sealed, and then everything above water open to the air. Submersible floors of cities, of city buildings. Now, Venice, because they built into the water, they had canals, so their chief means of transportation was boat. In a typical city, let's for instance say we took New York, or Manhattan basically, and sealed a couple hundred stories of building watertight. Now, how do we transport things? We do it by boat and submarine. Docking with the buildings, etc. But we don't have to flee the cities. We just have to upgrade. Another thing they say, another term they use is ocean acidification. This is a terrorist term, a media terrorist term, used to make us think that our waters are going to become toxically erosive to whatever attempts to get into them. This is far from the truth. Our basic ocean, basic is another term for salty or briny ocean, is loaded with minerals that are in solution. Water itself is a mild acid. So the more water leaches or melts into the ocean, the less salty it gets. This is what they mean by acidification. We usually call it in engineering products desalination. We actually build plants to do this in Africa where they've got a very limited water supply. Now, the more a glacier melts into the ocean, the more, the less salty it becomes. This is what is known as ocean water acidification. Now, our friends in the global climate change alarmist camp would have us believe that this would be destructive to ocean life. We have ocean life along the continental shelf, but then we've got this huge amount of real estate between the shelf and the mid-ocean ridge that's called the abyssal plain, and nothing lives there. Nothing. Now, as the water gets, or as the climate gets warmer, the water starts to evaporate. So water levels recede, and it opens up the continental shelf and part of the abyssal plain to cultivation by us after the salt is leached out of the ground that has just been exposed. The continental shelf and the mid-ocean ridge get closer, and therefore more life will actually be able to exist in the ocean than does at present, because there's more food for them and more and the two biomes actually get closer and start to intermix. This is what we call an adaptation. Fish will adapt to this fresher water, and the fish at the lower level, at the mid-ocean ridge, will adapt to lighter, less water pressure. Eventually, the two environments will merge at a certain point. At this point, the Earth will have achieved equilibrium. There will be a perfect amount of water vapor in the atmosphere and a perfect amount of water vapor in ocean water bodies. The atmospheric mist will keep rivers fed and plants watered across the continents. More continent will have been opened up. But in the 4 years to 7 years we're talking about, they're predicting that a permanent drying of the continents will happen. The data says otherwise, because the colder the environment gets, the larger the deserts get, because all of your water is locked in glaciers and the ocean basin. It's not functional. During the transition period, there may well be an extinction of some deserts because their glacial water feeds totally melt. But through that 4 to 7 year period, that excess heat in the atmosphere will drive up the amount of water vapor. Water vapor actually acts as a heat sink, as well as a solar diffuser and a solar reflector. So it blocks harmful radiation. It soaks up helpful radiation and sends it to the surface, and it diffuses that radiation so that everything is getting an even amount of the sunlight. Some of the most misty valleys you have to be extremely careful about, because you can get sunburnt in them even on those misty days. Eventually, that mist will saturate the atmosphere. As it saturates the atmosphere, the temperature will be more evenly spread across the surface. The equatorial temperatures will be cooled by the polar temperatures, and the polar temperatures will be heated by the equatorial temperatures, eventually ending up with an average global temperature across the board of around 63 degrees Fahrenheit worldwide. This, according to our climate alarmist friends, is a bad thing. Well, it's not a bad thing. It'll allow animals and plants from lower latitudes to be grown higher up. I said that earlier. But during this period of transition, we may even start to see ice crystals form in the upper atmosphere. Why? Because the water vapor is starting to go higher up. The higher up you get, the colder it gets. As I said, water vapor tends to be a heat sink. The more water vapor in the atmosphere, the higher the heat can get, but also when the vapor gets cool, it has the ability to make an ice crystal shell around the Earth. Now, this is interesting because the Holy Bible actually says that in the last days there will be hailstorms with hailstones the size of buses. I'm talking about city buses. This would be absolutely accurate if we're talking about the transition period between an ice age and a warmer climate. You would have to, for that period of 4 to 7 years, be careful about where these hailstones fell, because they could destroy your home. But according to our scripture, it's inevitable that the warming is going to occur. So, we have to be very careful about whether we listen to terrorism or truth. Terrorism is that our Earth will kill us if the climate gets warmer. If we put more CO2 into the atmosphere. Truth is that yes, we may go through a transition period between an ice age and a warmer climate that may be very challenging, that may have desert communities which relied on a glacier to feed a reservoir that watered the community, to wait for another source of water, which will be coming. Until then, they would have to rely on what we call secondary water, which is well water, groundwater. Eventually, it would be replaced with the mists rolling in from the oceans. Yes, there may be gigantic storms with hailstones the size of city buses, but that doesn't mean that we need to be afraid of it. On the other side, there's prosperity and bounty that we haven't experienced for 5,000 years. Do we induce more ice age to prevent the transition period from happening? Or do we go ahead and induce the transition period so we can get to the golden age that we have so longed to see, where everyone can flourish as they see fit? This is the question we all need to ask ourselves. Thank you for watching. Please, if you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, share, comment, and we'll see you next time. This has been Faces of Truth, where we attempt to help Americans think for themselves again, and in the process, spread truth throughout the minds of humanity. My name is Alexander McCauley. Thank you for watching. Stay free.